Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Irish Cancer Society Research Webinar to mark Daffodil Day 2022. Daffodil Day will be taking place this Friday, the 25th of March. My name is Niamh McCabe. I'm Research Officer here in the research team in the Irish Cancer Society, and I'll be chairing today's talk. This webinar is being recorded, so it can be made available to anyone who could not attend today. The theme of Daffodil Day this year is the day we take back from cancer. In celebration of this, I can think of no better speaker than Assistant Professor Emer Guinan, whose work focuses on improving quality of life for people living with and beyond cancer through personalised exercise programmes. As the number of cancer survivors continues to increase, attention must now focus on quality of life in cancer survivorship. Growing scientific evidence shows that exercise and physical activity can help patients in many ways. It can help to manage many cancer and treatment-related side effects, increase their physical fitness, and improve psychological well-being. Exercise rehab is therefore promoted as an important part of the cancer care pathway. However, here in Ireland, we have a lot of work to do to increase access to exercise rehabilitation services and to ensure that people are referred to appropriate services based on their individual needs. Emer Guinan is an assistant professor at the Trinity St. James's Cancer Institute and an Irish Cancer Society funded researcher. A physiotherapist by training, Emer's research over the past 10 years has focused on the role of exercise in supporting people throughout their cancer journey. She has published over 60 academic papers in the area and has been awarded numerous grants for her research. Emer is a strong advocate for patient involvement in designing and prioritising the research agenda, and her current work in personalised exercise rehabilitation aims to address the rehabilitation needs that matter most to people living with and beyond cancer. During this webinar, Emer will discuss the benefits of exercise in cancer survivorship and explain why exercise rehabilitation should be incorporated into the cancer care pathway. Emer will discuss the ongoing work from two of her Irish Cancer Society funded projects, the recently funded PERCS programme, which will develop an exercise referral pathway to support personalised exercise prescription and physical rehabilitation for cancer survivors in response to COVID, as well as the XMET project, which examined exercise participation in patients living with bone metastases and how this related to quality of life and risk of fracture. This webinar, as I said before, is being recorded, so it can be available to anyone who could not attend today. For anyone with hearing impairment, please reach out and we can provide a transcript of today's talk as well. Please share any questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And after Emer's presentation, she will be staying along with us for a few minutes to tackle some of these questions. For any that we don't get to today, or if you are watching this recording back and have any questions, please email research@irishcancer.ie and we will pass them along to Emer, who will get back to you then. For any questions specific to your health or your cancer diagnosis, we would encourage you to discuss this directly with your healthcare team. Knowing how hardworking and brilliant Emer is, I can only imagine the amount of info she's going to share with us today, so we'd better get started. You can share your presentation whenever you're ready, Emer.
Thank you, Niamh, for the introduction. I'll just share my screen. Great, and let me know if there's any issues with seeing the screen. Okay, Niamh, thank you very much for the introduction. I am delighted to be here this afternoon, and thank you to everyone who has joined, and thank you most particularly to the Irish Cancer Society for organising today's webinar and for inviting me to speak. As Niamh said, I'm going to go through, I suppose, this concept of exercise rehabilitation and how we can personalise that during the cancer journey. I'm going to talk about the benefits of exercise in cancer, why it's important, why we need to be talking about this. I'm going to talk about embedding cancer rehabilitation into the cancer care pathway, what the vision is and what the challenges are. And I'm going to give updates from two of the Irish Cancer Society funded projects that have been awarded to me over the last number of years, the PERCS programme and the XMET project. So why is this important? Why do we need to be talking about cancer rehabilitation and cancer survivorship? Well, we know that there are over 50,000, over 53,000 cancers diagnosed on the island of Ireland every year. And this number continues to grow. And in fact, by 2045, this number is expected to double. There are nearly 250,000, 250,000 people living with and beyond cancer on the island of Ireland. And this is really important because we now need to focus on optimizing quality of life and survivorship and embedding rehabilitation into the cancer care pathway to make outcomes as good as possible for these people. The numbers of people living with and beyond cancer will continue to grow. This is set out in the Irish Cancer Society's vision for cancer survivorship, that by 2025, 3 out of 4 Irish cancer patients will survive their cancer. And we need to focus on how we can optimize quality of life and outcome for these patients. This priority is set out in our own National Cancer Strategy, which was published in 2017, which for the first time called out the growing number of cancer survivors and the need to really focus on survivorship and rehabilitation as a priority issue under the 4 goals set out for the strategy. So you can see here that goal number 3 talks about maximizing patient involvement and maximizing quality of life for people. And under this goal, there is a specific goal to develop and implement survivorship care programs, including rehabilitation, to address this issue. At a European level, we see this called out as a priority under the European Code of Cancer Practice, which has been set out and developed by the European Cancer Organization. And this European Code is a patient and citizen-centered manifesto of the core requirements that are set out by cancer professionals, cancer patients, and patient advocates. The core requirement for good clinical cancer practice. What do we need to see to achieve better outcomes for people living with cancer? And out of the 10 rights that are set out under this code, 4 of them explicitly refer to the quality of life in survivorship. So number 7 here talks about you having a right to a quality of life and that being considered throughout your patient journey. Number 8, integrated, supportive and palliative care that is integrated as part of your cancer treatment. Number 9 talks about your right to survivorship and rehabilitation as a separate entity. And number 10 talks about reintegration back into the community and particularly return to work. So these are the expectations that patients and health professionals are setting out at a European level for cancer care at the moment. So we need to start looking at survivorship care and looking at rehabilitation and how we develop and embed this aspect of cancer care into the patient journey. And when I talk about survivorship and rehabilitation, I'm talking about survivorship rehabilitation starting from the time of your cancer diagnosis. So this here is a sample patient, we'll call her Anne, and she goes through her treatment. She's diagnosed. She might have a treatment period involving her chemotherapy or radiotherapy, followed by surgery and recovery after surgery, followed by some more treatment, and then her post-treatment recovery. I think traditionally we've thought about rehabilitation commencing once all of your treatment is completed, but really I'm going to talk today about survivorship and rehab starting much earlier and supporting people as they move through their cancer journey. So what is cancer rehabilitation? And I think sometimes we're inclined to think about rehabilitation just in the context of exercise, and that is what I will focus on during today's webinar. But really, cancer rehabilitation is much, much broader than that. It's any intervention and a range of interventions that are aimed at maximizing your physical, your psychological, your emotional, or your social well-being during and after cancer treatment. The aim of rehabilitation is to reduce the impact of treatment-related side effects and to improve quality of life for people. So in that vein, the interventions, okay, yes, will include exercise, but will also include a range of other interventions, such as psychosocial interventions, self-management support interventions, community reintegration programs, such as programs aimed at helping people to return to work, or dietary interventions to address some of the dietary and nutritional issues that are associated with survivorship. In that vein then as well, rehabilitation is something that is delivered by a wide range of healthcare professionals, physiotherapists, health psychologists, dietitians, occupational therapists, speech and language therapists, to name but a few. And these health professionals may work within hospitals or work more broadly in the community or more integrated into our localities. And this is one of the challenges with rehabilitation and survivorship care. How do we all work together most effectively? And ultimately, cancer rehabilitation and the services that are provided need to be defined by the needs and the priorities that patients present with. And we know that these needs can broadly fall into categories such as sexual needs, physical needs, psychological needs, social needs, or cognitive needs. But ultimately, the needs of the patient need to be at the centre of survivorship and rehabilitation planning. So in terms of exercise rehabilitation, what are the needs that we have, that our patients have here in Ireland? And really, we don't have an enormous amount of data on this. We have a lot of patient-reported outcomes around quality of life, but really, when we get into the nitty-gritty of what are the impairments that people actually present with, we need more data there. These are some of the priorities that a colleague of mine, Gráinne Shields, sees. She's a clinical specialist in cancer rehabilitation at St. James's Hospital. And patients presenting to her, they report shoulder problems, so problems with shoulder pain and shoulder range of movement, particularly if they have had surgery for cancers such as breast cancer, maybe for lung or esophageal cancer, if there's been an incision down the side of the rib cage, or head and neck cancer. So these shoulder problems need to be addressed to support people to exercise and to have better quality of life and survivorship. She sees a lot of reduced fitness. People are aerobically not as fit, they're not as physically active. And from a muscle strength point of view, people feel weaker and don't feel as strong. Cancer-related fatigue is a big issue, and fatigue that becomes overwhelming and interferes with activities of daily living. Breathlessness for people maybe with underlying conditions, people who have had lung cancers or people who have had radiotherapy to the chest area. Reduced sensations in the hands and feet, also known as peripheral neuropathy, which can arise as a side effect of certain treatments. Pain, not just shoulder pain, but more generalized pain. Lymphedema. So lymphedema is an issue that can impact on people who have lymph nodes removed. So it can happen a lot with breast cancer, with head and neck cancer, and with other cancers. And then anxiety. So people being very anxious about their road ahead, about their recovery, and maybe if people haven't been supported through their cancer journey in the ideal kind of rehab and survivorship model that we would like to see developed. So where does exercise play a role, and what can exercise do for people? And I'm going to talk about the benefits of exercise under two main headings. Firstly, strong scientific evidence, and secondly, then growing scientific evidence. So under the category of strong scientific evidence, and this is where we have a lot of studies, a lot of really consistent studies and really strong data with big numbers of people, where we know that exercise is really, really effective as an intervention for dealing with these side effects. So we know that exercise can reduce anxiety for people, can reduce depression, can reduce cancer-related fatigue, which can seem counterintuitive, but it's really, really effective in this regard. It can improve people's quality of life, improve physical functioning, and typically this is people's abilities to do their normal activities of daily living, which is really, really important for reintegrating back into your community. And finally, when prescribed and supervised properly by a health professional, we know that exercise training does not exacerbate, does not make symptoms of lymphedema worse. And that's really important because there's some mixed messaging around that, but we know when exercise is prescribed and done properly and supervised properly, it does not make lymphedema worse. Then we have lots of studies coming out and lots of growing evidence for benefits of exercise in lots of different areas. We know that exercise can improve sleep. And it was World Sleep Day last week, and there was a lot of emphasis on that, on the impact of poor sleep and poor sleep quality in people with cancer. So exercise, particularly aerobic exercise, is very effective in this regard. Improve bone health. So we know that exercise is important for people across society who have osteoporosis or brittle bones, and the same applies here for people who experience brittle bones as a result of some of their treatment. Reduces damage to the heart, and there's a lot of interesting work going on where exercise has been prescribed for people who go on treatments that may have a damaging effect on the heart, and that exercise can preserve heart function. It's really important that we look more into this. Reduce sensation in the hands and feet, so exercise can help with some of those symptoms of peripheral neuropathy. Improve cognitive function, such as memory. Improve treatment tolerance. This is really, really important. So we know that when people can exercise while they're receiving their chemotherapy or their radiotherapy, but particularly chemotherapy, that exercise can help people cope better with their chemotherapy, with any side effects that may arise, with their treatment and reduce the number of side effects or toxicities that may occur. Reduce falls or pain or nausea or other unpleasant symptoms that can arise. And we know that, sorry, it's just covering on the bottom there, reduce falls, pains and symptoms. I just can't see the last. Oh, there, oh yeah, and improve sexual function, particularly in people with prostate cancer. There's lots of work coming out in that area. So how much exercise should I complete? How much exercise is important? So when we're talking about aerobic exercise, we're talking about exercise such as walking or running or swimming or aqua aerobics, or exercises that get the heart rate increase, that increase your breathing rate, and that result in you sweating a little. So moderate intensity aerobic exercise. So exercise where you, let's say you're out for a walk with your friend, you're working at a moderate intensity if you can talk and you can hold a conversation, which you couldn't sing, for example. So moderate intensity aerobic exercise is recommended for people to complete 3 days per week for at least 30 minutes per session for up to 8 to 12 weeks. And when people can exercise to that level, we know that we can see a lot of the benefits that I put forward in the last slide around anxiety, reducing depression, and improving quality of life. So at least 3 days per week, 30-minute sessions at that moderate intensity where you can talk, but you can't sing. Resistance exercise, and there's a lot of work coming out in this area. Resistance exercise refers to any exercise that involves lifting weights and building muscle mass, building muscle strength. And I think we'll see a lot more evidence coming out in this area over the next number of years. We know that preserving muscle is really, really important for people, particularly in terms of tolerating treatment. So at the moment, resistance exercise is recommended that we should be doing strength training twice a week for all your major muscle groups, and that people are recommended to do 2 sets of 12 to 15 repetitions at 60% of your maximum. Now, when we talk about that, we mean your maximum is the maximum weight that you can lift or the maximum load that you can move in one movement. So working at 60% of that is recommended to build lean muscle mass and strength for benefits. But we know that people are going through treatment, and that treatment can have an effect on how well you can feel on different days. People have good days, people have bad days. And I suppose the overarching message that's really important to get out there is that you should be as active as you can and avoid inactivity. So on those days where people aren't feeling well, the recommendations for physical activity are to try and avoid really prolonged, long periods of inactivity and break it up. Do little and often in terms of your activity, and exercise or be active as your symptoms allow. And it's really important that we get that message out there and that we balance that against any messaging around rest. And it's important that we get both. But I think traditionally we see a lot of patients when they get their cancer diagnosis, their normal physical activity and their normal exercise habits, they stop straight away. And people find it very difficult to get back to those levels of exercise that they may have done before their diagnosis. So it's important that we have messaging that is appropriate around exercise right from the start. Special considerations then, and this is for people who need to go and discuss any new exercise habits with a health professional before they get started. And it's important that we touch on these so that people can exercise safely. So firstly, in terms of bone loss and bone metastases, if you know that your bones have become very brittle over the course of your treatment, you really should go and see a health professional before taking up a new exercise program. I'm going to talk about bone metastases more specifically towards the end of this presentation, but it's also important that we give safe exercise advice for that group. Lymphedema then I touched on earlier. It is important that you get good advice around exercise, particularly weight training exercise. If you have lymphedema, it should be supervised, it should be progressed slowly, and it should be done with the oversight of somebody who knows what they are prescribing. So that's another important area. Older adults can have a lot of other issues and other chronic diseases. And if you do, it's important to go and see your health professional as well, so that there is a more comprehensive assessment of need done and more specific exercise advice given to you. People with ostomies or stomas need to be careful around lifting and contact sports and should get advice in that regard. People, again, with reduced sensations in the hands or the feet, that peripheral neuropathy coming back again, there can be issues there with falls and coordination and balance. So again, we want people to be able to exercise safely and get some advice before starting. People who've had stem cell transplantation, again, we want people to exercise when it's most appropriate in terms of their immunity or any kind of brittle bones. Symptom clusters, and this is, I suppose, the reality. People won't just present with one symptom, but may have many symptoms that need to be taken into account. And again, by seeing somebody before you get starting to exercise will be important for managing the priority symptom for you, but exercising in consideration with your overall physical health and medical presentation. The last thing that I need to touch on is sun safety. And this is something that's coming out more and more. As we encourage more people to exercise, and we encourage people to get outdoors and exercise, it's important that you remember basic sun safety recommendations around wearing protective clothing or wearing appropriate sunscreen while you exercise to protect your skin. So this concept then of personalized cancer rehabilitation or personalized exercise rehabilitation, what do I mean here? Well, it's about getting back to that first diagram that I showed you around the interventions, the health professionals and the needs and priorities that inform or provide the building blocks for cancer rehabilitation. And personalized cancer rehabilitation means that we're providing the right interventions at the right time in the cancer journey, care provided by the right specialists, by the right healthcare professionals, and that the patient's needs, that we are addressing the priorities and the needs as set out by you, by the patient, by the person undergoing treatment, so that we're tackling the issues that are impacting most particularly on quality of life and return to function. So how do we achieve this concept of personalised cancer rehabilitation? So thinking now about what your cancer rehabilitation journey should look like to achieve this goal. We're back here to our patient, we're back to Anne, and we're back to thinking about her survivorship and rehabilitation commencing from the time of her diagnosis. So in an ideal world, what should her cancer rehabilitation look like? Well, firstly, in terms of physical activity recommendations, people should be receiving the recommendations about physical activity from the time of diagnosis. And that messaging should be individualized, so advice given based on the goals set out by the patient and the needs that they present with. And it should be a consistent message, so that even if there are days when you're not feeling well, that advice to avoid inactivity and to be active as your condition allows is there. Okay, so we would like to see activity recommendations consistently delivered from the time of diagnosis. Then thinking about all of those rehabilitation needs that we see patients presenting with. In an ideal world, we would like to see better emphasis on those rehab needs, again, from the time of diagnosis, that screening assessments are completed regularly so that we're picking up on issues while they're just minor issues, so that we're picking up on shoulder pain or issues of movement before they become very big issues, and that we can detect that impairment early and give early intervention to stop them becoming bigger problems. These kind of assessments should be integrated into the cancer care pathway, and there should be specialist assessments that are delivered and completed by health professionals who are specialists in the field. That's in an ideal world. In terms then of exercise rehabilitation, where does it sit? Where have we evidence and where should we be incorporating exercise? Again, from diagnosis, we know that exercise during treatment can help support people to cope with that treatment, but it's very difficult to incorporate and embed exercise while people are, grappling with chemotherapy and radiotherapy. Some of the services that we have developed, particularly at the Trinity St. James's Cancer Institute, are around these concepts of exercise prehabilitation. So exercise programs that are delivered to patients in preparation for big surgeries in particular. We know that increasing people's fitness in the lead up to surgery helps them physically and mentally prepare for that surgery and cope better with their outcomes afterwards. So it's really important that we have people as fit as possible leading in to cancer surgeries. Enhanced recovery after surgery. This is something that I suppose physiotherapists are very good at. And any patient online who has had surgery as part of your cancer treatment, you'll have seen a physiotherapist the next day, hopefully. And that physiotherapist would have helped you with your exercise journey starting on day one, getting up out of bed, starting to walk short distances and increasing those distances during your inpatient stay. And it's important that we really embed enhanced recovery and see, I suppose, your exercise journey starting from that point. And then we give patients plans both for while they're in hospital and when they go home and they start to recover after their surgery to increase their physical activity levels again. And then exercise rehabilitation. And I think this is what we traditionally think about when we think about where exercise might fit in. We have developing services. We have some really good community-based services for people such as the likes of Exwell or Ciel Bleu, where people can go and start exercising after their cancer treatment. And we are developing more and more the types of referral pathways. And it's something that we're going to look at more as part of some of the PERCS program, which I'll talk to you about later. But exercise rehabilitation really needs to be a standard part of the cancer care pathway, that once the person goes through their treatment, that we get them back on track, that we get their fitness increased, that we improve their quality of life through structured exercise programs delivered as per standard care in their post-treatment recovery. So what are the barriers to this? Why don't we have this ideal model of cancer rehabilitation in Ireland? And it's a global issue. Rehabilitation services are only just developing. Well, there are issues across the board. Firstly, staffing. We don't have an enormous number of physiotherapists dedicated to oncology care. We did a survey in our group back a number of years ago now in 2018, but at that time, there were only 3.5 junior physiotherapists and 8.5 senior physiotherapy posts across our cancer centres. And these weren't in all of the hospitals. Some hospitals were without a service at that time. Since then, at St. James's, 2 clinical specialist physiotherapists have been appointed, one in prehabilitation and one in rehabilitation, to really drive services and drive the standard in this context. And we would hope to see that replicated in other cancer centres across the country. We have an issue with coordinated care, this concept of interprofessional working. So I showed you in one of my earlier slides the number of health professionals who need to be involved, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. You know, there are lots more in terms of the overall cancer pathway, the overall cancer journey, and moving out then into the community. We need better systems of referring between the hospital and the community. Breakdowns in communication can cause a barrier to continued care. So we need better integration of services, better communication and referral pathways and services between different health professionals. We need better awareness of the roles of some of the rehabilitation specialists. Do people know what an occupational therapist does, for example, and how an occupational therapist can help you to achieve your cancer rehabilitation goals? The same applies to a physiotherapist or a dietitian. And we also need to have a better understanding of the services that currently exist and how to access them. In terms of workforce education and training, we need to do a lot more to support our health professionals to keep up to date with current knowledge, to develop skills, to provide specialist training, to embed training into undergraduate programs and help people to develop specialities in these areas. So we have a lot of work to do, but we are moving in the right direction. We're hoping to address some of these issues in some of the work that the Irish Cancer Society has funded quite recently. So I'm going to talk initially about the PERCS project, and then I'll talk about the XMET project. So last year, on foot of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Irish Cancer Society released a COVID Cancer Rapid Response Award. So in recognition that cancer treatment is associated with many side effects, which can negatively impact on quality of life and survivorship, and then compounded on top of that, the COVID-19 pandemic has had a profound impact on physical and mental well-being. This has created an urgency to make evidence-based exercise rehabilitation a priority for cancer care in Ireland to address the dual impact of both cancer treatment and COVID-19 on physical and psychological health. And we currently have no system in Ireland to support coordination between our limited hospital and community-based exercise rehabilitation services. So addressing these gaps is the aim of the PERCS, the Personalised Exercise Rehabilitation in Cancer Survivorship Programme, which we have just commenced at the Trinity St. James's Cancer Institute. So PERCS has 2 main aims: Aim 1 is to create a trusted web resource that is patient-informed, that contains exercise rehabilitation information, all of the information that patients may prioritize in this space, and also creates a national directory of services so people have a better idea of what services are out there and how they may access them. We are working with patients to develop this resource, which we will place on the Trinity St. James's Cancer Institute website. Aim 2 then is to create a personalised exercise referral pathway. So we're like a triage and referral pathway. So anyone who comes and gets enrolled in the PERCS programme will have a specialist assessment by a physiotherapist. And based on that assessment, which I'll describe in the next slide, they'll have an onward referral to a suitable exercise resource for them. We are asking two main questions from this programme. Does this pathway, does this system of referring people out to the most suitable exercise resource for them, does that improve their physical and their psychological health? Does it have positive benefits for the patient? And the second question that we're really important, that we consider really important is this pathway suitable for the real world setting? Is it something that can be incorporated into clinical practice? Is it something that works for the health professional? So what does the pathway look like? So when a patient comes in for assessment, we're going to assess three main areas. Firstly, their physical activity levels. Are they currently physically active, or are they not achieving the current recommendations in terms of their physical activity levels? Secondly, we're going to do a medical assessment, look at any underlying conditions that need to be taken into account that would inform their exercise prescription. And thirdly, we'll look at the treatments that they had and any side effects that they may still be experiencing as a result of those treatments. And do those side effects and impairments need to be dealt with more comprehensively before we can refer people out for exercise training? Based on that, we will categorise people into three main areas. Level 1 will be people who are exercising quite well already and don't have any residual issues. They'll be directed to the webpage that we create for any additional information. Level 2 then are people who are doing very well, they've no underlying conditions and they've no persistent impairments, but they really need some help and support getting back to their exercise levels. And they'll be referred out to our community partners. So we will refer to places such as the XWELL programme, we will refer to Ciel Bleu, and we will also work with patients to identify exercise resources more locally to them that they may be interested in joining. And then level 3 are people who are really struggling to get back to their activity levels, and they may also be experiencing ongoing side effects that are making it difficult for them to exercise. Those people will be sent on to the physiotherapist, who will complete a more comprehensive assessment and be given an individualised treatment plan to address those impairments before they're sent out to exercise more locally. So the PERCS programme will develop and test this referral pathway. We are currently looking for people to get involved in PERCS, to get involved in designing the webpage that we are creating to form part of our webpage advisory group. If you're online and you're interested in joining this advisory group, we're looking for anyone who has undergone treatment, who has completed treatment, or who's living with secondary cancer. You're all welcome to volunteer. We'll have two meetings, one on the 26th of April and one in May. These meetings will be to inform the content that goes into the webpage. We have some ideas of what we would like to include, but we really want patients to tell us what the priority information is. And secondly, we want to present it in a way that is accessible and means something to patients. So we need our webpage advisory group to work with us on advising us on these items. So if you're interested in getting involved, email our dedicated email address at perks@tcd.ie. Finally, then, I want to talk about exercise training in a special group of patients, people who are living with bone metastases. So with advances in treatment, we know that people can live with bone metastases for quite a number of years. And there's lots of evidence coming out in this group to show that exercise has lots of benefits for patients living with bone mets. They can improve quality of life, it can improve body composition, help people with their weight, help people to build muscle, and it can help to improve their fitness levels. Despite this evidence, we know that clinicians, so doctors, nurses, physiotherapists, we've spoken to them all, have concerns about advising exercise in people living with bone mets. In particular, people are concerned that exercise may increase the risk of a bone fracture or a break, and this is called a skeletal related event. So XMET set out to examine the links between physical activity, history of skeletal related events such as a bone fracture or break, and patient reported outcomes in terms of quality of life in people living with bone metastases. So we have just completed our data analysis for this study. We recruited 58 people living with bone mets from St. James's Hospital, from Tala University Hospital, from Our Lady's Hospice and Care Services at Harold's Cross, and through a community recruitment drive with the Irish Cancer Society. Anyone who enrolled in the study, we measured their physical activity levels using an accelerometer, which is a little device like a pedometer, but more sophisticated, that we gave people to wear for a week. And it allowed us look in detail at people's physical activity levels and patterns of physical activity levels. We looked at people's quality of life. We examined beliefs and barriers around exercise and how they apply to the participants in the study. We looked at pain levels, we looked at sleep quality, and we did comprehensive medical history, including capturing any skeletal related events or bone breaks or fractures. So what did we find? Well, firstly, in terms of general physical activity levels, if we look over here at this column, we see that people involved in the XMET study spend 78% of their time sedentary or sitting or inactive. This isn't particularly unusual for cancer survivors or even for the population generally. We are a very sedentary, inactive population at the moment. People in the XMET study all spent about 20% of their day engaged in light intensity activity and about 2% of their day doing moderate or vigorous intensity activity that we know is associated with all of the health benefits that we've been discussing throughout this webinar. Then we looked at patterns of physical activity. So we categorized people into two main categories. Firstly, those who are active. So those who are achieving the physical activity guidelines that are set out by the American College of Sports Medicine. And then we looked at people who were not achieving the physical activity guidelines, and we called them the active and the inactive group. So you can see here in the blue, the active group were really, really active. They were doing maybe 350 minutes per week of moderate or vigorous intensity activity. So the red line shows the amount of activity that's recommended, and the blue bar shows you actually they were doing way in excess of that. Then we have a really inactive group. We have the group who weren't hitting the physical activity guidelines. And not only were they not hitting them, they were really, really shy of them. They were hitting at around 50 minutes of moderate intensity activity per week when we wanted them doing 150. So we have two big, very contrasting groups here that we need to consider. And what did we find out about these people who weren't active? Well, these were the people who had a history of a bone fracture. This obviously had a profound impact on their physical activity levels. These people also reported higher pain scores, and particularly pain that interfered with function. They reported poor quality of life, again, particularly in the area of physical functioning, so that they found they couldn't be as physically engaged as they would like to be and completing their activities of daily living. They had poorer sleep quality, and their beliefs around the benefits of exercise to them were far lower than the group who were active. So the results here show us that we have a group of people living with bone mets who are very, very inactive and who have a whole cascade of issues, quality of life issues associated with that. And this is a prime target, these group prime target for physical activity advice and interventions that we need to work with. In terms of exercising with bone mets, though, the concerns around, bone risk and fragility and bone, the risk of breaking a bone or fracture, they are quite real. But that doesn't create a barrier to exercise participation. In January, an expert international group set out a document of recommendations or guidelines, particularly aimed at health professionals around the advice, how we go about exercising people with bone mets so that we do not increase the risk of fracture and that we allow people to exercise as safely as possible. The recommendations that come from this are particularly aimed at health professionals. I have them summarized here, but I'd say two things. Firstly, if you have bone mets, you should go and seek out a health professional to advise you on how to commence your exercise program. And secondly, for any health professionals who are on the line if you would like more information about these guidelines, you're welcome to get in contact with me and I can share this resource with you. But the main recommendations coming from that group were that before commencing exercise, assess the risk of a bone complication from exercise. Number 2, work with the multidisciplinary team. And these 2 recommendations are very much tied in together. So we have our physiotherapists, our nurses, our doctors, all working very closely together to understand where the bone mets are, how big they are, what type they are, and how we can safely prescribe exercise in consideration of that. Recommendation 3, get the right healthcare professional. And in Ireland, our physiotherapists are regulated by CORU, which is the Health and Social Care regulator. A lot of physiotherapists are also registered with the Irish Society of Chartered Physiotherapists. And this is the regulated group that we can turn to for exercise advice for people living with bone mets. No, recommendation number 4, careful baseline testing. Again, in consideration of where your bone met may be, we want to test your strength and test your fitness before you start in an exercise program. We want to do that quite carefully so that we are getting the best information without putting you at any risk. And then emphasis on good exercise technique. And this is where you need to see a health professional to advise you appropriately here. Okay, so the message is that if you're living with bone mets, exercise is recommended for you, and there are ways that we can support you to exercise quite safely. And for the health professionals, there are good guidelines available now that you can follow in order to support your patients to exercise while living with bone metastases. So I'm just going to finish up here with this slide. I'm one of a large research team working in the Trinity St. James's Cancer Institute. We have academics and researchers and our clinical colleagues as well. And we're all working towards, I suppose, creating a better understanding of the benefits of exercise for patients with cancer. And we have a number of ongoing projects, and a lot of these projects are funded by the Irish Cancer Society. And with that in mind, a lot of that funding comes from the funds raised during Daffodil Day. So I thank you all for supporting Daffodil Day throughout the last number of years, and again encourage you to support on Friday. And I'm happy to take any questions that have come through during the course of the webinar.
Emer, thanks so much for your presentation. You clearly have so much going on, so to give us your time, we really, really do appreciate it. So we have a few questions in. Firstly, just I suppose because you just talked about 2 research studies, we might take a question on that. Somebody's wondering, for the measuring the quality of life, what outcome measurement tool did you use?
So again, it depends on the group. We tend to use one called the EORTC, which is a really comprehensive quality of life tool. And the EORTC also has what are called these disease-specific modules. So again, it's that personalized approach. So we do a lot with different groups. So we measure general quality of life, and then the disease-specific module will allow us to measure quality of life in patients either with bone mets or with gastric or esophageal cancer, or whatever it may be, to delve down deeper into the specific issues that they may be experiencing.
Okay, very good. So we have a few other questions now as well. So needless to say, people affected by cancer at any stage of their journey, it can be extremely overwhelming. Are there concerns over overburdening patients? There's a question there. So are there challenges among people undergoing cancer treatment when they hear about things like exercise, or does attempting to be active and exercise get universal acceptance when introduced to patients?
Well, I suppose there's a few things there. Firstly, I don't think people are getting consistent messages around exercise. That's probably one of the things. And if we had no other aspiration coming from this webinar, it would be that people get a clear, consistent message around exercise from the time of their diagnosis. And I suppose people get overwhelmed. An awful lot of information comes when you receive your diagnosis. And, it's about, I suppose, your communication around there. We work an awful lot with patient advocates in designing and setting up some of our trials. And I suppose I'll give one example. We're doing a prehabilitation trial. It's actually funded from the Irish Cancer Society at the moment. And it's about recruiting people in the lead up to their surgery, to exercise people in preparation for their surgery, to help them to become as fit as possible, to help their post-surgery recovery. When we worked with patients around, how to develop our recruitment strategies for that trial, people advised us that there's a lot happening at that time. People, they receive an awful lot of information. How you communicate is really important. The written communication that we develop, and also the verbal communication. And that has been advice really still, I suppose, very important advice that we have taken on board, and has informed how we speak to people, encourage them to be active and to recruit onto the trial. So I think there's a lot there around communication style.
Yeah, and really enabling them, I suppose, they're feeling, them feeling empowered that they can do something positive to affect the quality of life as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
Brilliant. So from your presentation, obviously in your area of cancer rehabilitation, the range of interventions that are required when it's spelled out, it all makes sense, but it must be very difficult to get all these interventions with the range of healthcare professionals required to tie in together, especially obviously based around a patient's needs. So the question was, roughly what percentage of patients in Ireland who might benefit from a physio consultation actually gets access to one?
Oh gosh, that's a great question, and I don't know the answer off the top of my head.
I suppose the answer is not enough, maybe.
Not enough is probably the bottom line. I know that Grania Shield, who I've just spoken about, set up she's the clinical specialist in cancer rehab at the Trinity St. James's Cancer Institute. Her service was set up in October, and between October and now she's seen 150 patients, and she's developed a waiting list, and that's at one centre, and she's seeing patients across 7 tumor types. She's not seeing everyone yet, so there is such a need, such demand out there. But not everyone. It's not embedded as part of the care pathway at the moment, and we really need to do more to I suppose tackle that.
Absolutely, and we have a few questions here on the same topic. Obviously, as you're saying, that it's not embedded in the care pathway now, let alone a few years ago. So we have a question here from Eileen that, as there are a large number of people living after cancer who may be 5 years or more out and never got a whiff of exercise information, is there sufficient resources or referral pathways into community-based exercises? And are community, gym PTs trained, such as in the CAN-REB UK qualification and other areas, I suppose, that could support people in the community?
Yeah, some great questions there. So 5 years out, and it's hard to know. I think what would be ideal would be to see a physiotherapist first, to have an assessment in terms of any impairments that may be lingering, to have them dealt with, and then referral in. Perks is really looking at this issue. We really want to make better use of the set up referral pathways so that people can see physiotherapists, have impairments dealt with, get started on their exercise journey, and then refer out to places such as Ciel Bleu and Exwell. And I'm just naming those two off the top of my head because I've done work with them and I know they do really good work, but there must be others, and there can be others. In terms of the fitness professionals in gyms, we did some work with this group a number of years ago. We provided some training, and I suppose what I'd say is I think fitness professionals are really open to the idea of embracing having more people with chronic disease generally come to gyms and exercising, and I think it's an important area of service that we need to develop. However, we have done work to show that people feel maybe they don't have the knowledge, the skills, the confidence, the pathways over and back, and communication pathways there. So it is certainly a challenge, and if possible, if someone could join a more disease, not disease focused, but something more like Ciel Bleu, for example, that you have fitness professionals who have a little bit more training in chronic disease management, and you can, I suppose, we know that they're a lot more comfortable with people who might have longer issues, but we've a lot to do to coordinate and integrate between all of our services.
Yeah, and I suppose throughout your research, you've shown the importance of having a tailored exercise program for each person. So if that's already hard enough to provide from physio, then it would be very hard to obviously have a more general service in the community. Exactly. You said before that in your Perks webpage that it would have more of a directory for it that will help to point people in the right direction, which could be a hugely useful resource.
Absolutely useful for patients. We're going to design the Perks webpage for patients, but we're going to make health professionals very aware of it as well. So, I mean, people like, let's say Catherine O'Brien, for example, is fantastic A&P in survivorship at St. James's, so that when she sees people as a survivorship nurse, that she knows where to go to refer people out, and the physios can access that list as well.
On the topic of kind of a personalized exercise program, as you say, obviously it'll vary for each person, even though you gave the guidelines of, say 3 times of moderate exercise a week and 2 resistance. Obviously that will change then depending on the patient, what you'd advise for them.
Yeah, so generally when we're personalizing exercise, we keep that, I suppose, overall ambition and overall goal.
Yeah.
And the kind of things that we would do is alter the intensity. So we would test people's fitness as they start, and then prescribe based on a fitness level, a starting exercise fitness level that is appropriate for them. We might start in shorter bouts based on things like fatigue, the messaging and often. If someone has, I spoke a lot about sensation issues in fingers and hands, or hands and feet. If people have a lot of issues with the feet, for example, we would tailor the mode of exercise that we advise. So, we wouldn't get people walking, for example, if they were having issues with falls, but we might put people up on stationary bikes. So it's this big picture and how it informs every aspect of exercise prescription, everything that you might advise to a patient.
Okay, and there's a question there around swimming. How does that kind of fit in? I suppose, Eileen's saying that it might not be a weight-bearing exercise, but is it very useful in a cancer setting, I suppose?
Yeah, so I suppose like cancer survivors, I suppose the piece of swimming, you want to be careful around infection for people who are on treatment.
Yeah.
Someone is, into that I suppose the post-treatment phase. Swimming is a great aerobic exercise, really good for the range of movement of the shoulder and the arm and the thorax and the chest area. So, it addresses some of those issues. And we would always say that, do exercise that you enjoy. And that's another piece of the personalization. We set goals that are specific for people based on their enjoyment. So in terms of achieving your aerobic goals, swimming is great. But if you have issues with your bone as well, it would be important to incorporate, some of the weight exercises, resistance training exercises and weight-bearing exercises for those benefits too. But in terms of an aerobic activity, it's a very good activity.
Okay, very good. We have lots of thank yous in there for a very interesting chat as well, even from Malaysia, I see. I see that we have another question there in terms of referring people out to community-based classes. Is there rationale for referring to general programs and not to cancer-specific ones? I suppose in an ideal world, it would be cancer-specific.
Yeah, I think there's both. I mean, I think, there's, look, when we talk about survivorship and we talk about reintegration back into the community, which is really important, what we want is for people to reintegrate back normally and back into their local GAA, back into all of their local, activities that they have always enjoyed. That is the ultimate goal. With perks, we're going to look at, if we can integrate people. If we can support people to increase their exercise through, more cancer-specific programs in the first instance, great. But ultimately, that end goal of reintegration back into your local exercise group or whatever you've always enjoyed, that's the end goal. And whatever steps are needed along the way should be informed by, how a patient presents. If they have impairments that need to be addressed, if they need support. But ultimately, that person should be back independently, back living as themselves again.
Absolutely. I think that ties into another question we have here from Amy. Have patients reported a sense of empowerment or control over their cancer disease when enrolled on prehab and rehab programs?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I could tell you so many stories about people who have we've run the Restore program in St. James's for a number of years, which has been specifically for people with esophageal and gastric cancers. And, there's just fantastic stories from some of those people. And I'm sure this person won't mind telling the story. They had a goal at the start of the program. They were going to climb the sugar loaf at the end, and they did the sugar loaf at the end. And, it was just such, that meant so much to that particular individual to have that goal, to achieve it with their friends, and not only their vision themselves, how they viewed themselves, but how their friends, how their family. There's another fantastic story of someone who at the start of Restore, had kind of disengaged a bit from like the local community, and by the end he was back involved in his local GAA, back training underage teams, which is an energetic activity. It's those kind of things that people they got that bit of confidence. Their families were like, oh gosh, you can do that. Their friends could see them out and about going for their walks. Gosh, that person can do that again. We'll back, we'll ask them to come and go into a match, come on with me, or, back socially integrated again. And ultimately, that's what we want with people.
Yeah, so it's not just about seeing yourself as a patient anymore, but also everyone else seeing that too. Because there's a question around that saying that, throughout their chemo journey, they were running, but mum and husband wanted to cotton ball me. I can only run on days I wasn't ill, but running really helped me to emerge from the nausea on my good days. What type of resources exist to help our carers to understand the benefits of exercise?
Oh yeah, that's a super, super question. Firstly, not enough. I know in the north they have this lovely resource called Cancer Care and Coping that is for people. It's kind of like an information tool for people as they go through treatment, and we'd love to develop something similar to that to support family members as they go through. We're doing a bit of work at the moment trying to develop an exercise intervention for people while on treatment. I have a new PhD student to start with me, going to do some work around that. And we're going to start with some focus groups with patients and family members and carers and health professionals, because we see the family members as a key stakeholder. And we want to design and develop some sort of intervention to support people while on treatment to achieve what, that person achieved, but that they can see the benefits of that, and I suppose have input into what that should look like, because family members can be very concerned, and that's fair enough as their loved one goes through treatment. We've seen that participants on our research programs, and they come back and they say that I went to get out the bike and my wife saw me and she told me to put it away. So we have a lot of work to do to kind of bring family members along. I know some places will bring family members in and have them exercise as part of the exercise class as well, to let them see what their loved one can do. We involve family members in some of our programs as well, overseeing the exercise prescription that we give, and that all those things help. But I do agree that we need to bring family members and carers along. We cannot exclude them. And I feel sorry for anyone during COVID, who maybe didn't have that element of support, because it is so, so important that we bring them with the person as they go through their treatment.
And again, I suppose that's the benefit of having a web resource then that you can refer back to and point people in the right direction. But there is a question there about people who live rurally or who do not, who aren't on the internet and everything. How will they be able to receive this information?
Yeah, and that's something we've been thinking about. We don't we don't have budget set aside in this iteration, but what we would aspire to is that if we can develop the web source, and we can develop it quite well, that we would be able down the line to develop something that's more paper based and maybe more accessible, and maybe work with people like the cancer support centres, for example, to disseminate that. But I do agree that I think there's been a reliance on technology during COVID as well, but we and it's been great, but we do need to acknowledge that not everyone has access, and access issues and equity issues are a problem.
Absolutely, but I suppose, as you said before, the website isn't just for patients and their families, it's also for healthcare professionals and things too. So hopefully that would mean that there will be more help nationally as well. Even if you can't access the information yourself, there could be more skilled professionals out there as well.
Yeah. Exactly.
We have a few other questions there. Yeah. So one is around really at the end of life, I suppose, at metastatic patients and stage 4 breast cancer patients, where they sleep an awful long time during the day. They can sleep up to 20 hours a day or so.
Yeah.
Should they use alarm to get up and move around, or is this just cruel at this stage of cancer?
No, I suppose when we're talking about, end of life, you're in terms of, I suppose, priorities at that time.
Yeah.
Know that even in palliative care, that a little bit of exercise and a little bit of function can help. And I suppose I'm talking very much of very end of life here, in terms of the last number of days and weeks, which I assume you're referring to here. We know that if we can help people to do a little for themselves and maintain independence, maintain function through whatever that exercise looks like for that person, a bit of movement in the bed, a little bit of sitting up straight, whatever it may be. But that's that concept of personalizing things and, making sure that the messaging and everything is individualized for people. So it's all managed in the context of the overarching priority of the treatment plan at that time.
And as you said, I suppose the entire point of this is that the patient is the focus. So it's what's important to them and what they want to do as well that way.
Exactly. Exactly. But, in palliative care, there are some excellent rehab professionals and physios who help people right up until end of life. And it's, things like maintaining function to, for self-care and activities of daily living are all very important to people as well. So it's not something that you rule out, but it's something that you prioritize and you manage in the context of the overall priority.
Yeah. And as you said before, I suppose they're just kind of clarifying that it's at any stage where you can sleep a long time during treatment. Again, as you said, it's about the patient, what they're able for.
Exactly.
And I suppose to hopefully to avoid inactivity, as you said before, it's not about,
Yeah. So if people need to sleep, people need to sleep. And that is, that's the priority at that time. But, during wakeful times, if you can intersperse with activity or breaking up inactivity, if that's all it's seen as, then that can have benefits for people as well.
Absolutely. No, it's brilliant. And we have a few questions kind of more specific to patients' own experiences. So I might encourage them to contact their own healthcare professionals for them, specific things say around swallowing and everything. There are other supports available for that, Emer.
Yeah. So swallow issues, I actually haven't looked at any of the questions yet, just about, but let's say swallow issues can, the speech and language therapists help a lot with that. And again, they have the same issues as physios in terms of the amount of services that are available, etc. But, you do have very specialist people there who can help with swallow issues. Again, any kind of nutrition, dietary issues, your dietitian is your person to go to, and your occupational therapist, who I mentioned during the session, because I don't think we always associate them with exercise, but they play a really important role in terms of self-management support, fatigue management, return to work and things like that. So there's lots of specialists out there to help with different issues that people may experience. Again, it's the access to these services that we need to improve on.
Absolutely. And I think one final question, and we're over the hour mark, but it's about feeling overwhelmed about where to start with exercise, having pain post-treatment, and being encouraged to exercise, but not, basically not being able. I suppose that's what we said before, isn't it? It's about what the patient is able for and what the person can cope with at that time. Everything's already very overwhelming, and it's not to add to their burden.
No, exercise is something that should be there to support a person to cope with their treatment. Exercise is there as an intervention to reduce anxiety, to reduce depression, to improve quality of life. I've had people throughout the years who have been very fatigued, for example, and have felt very overwhelmed at the concept of how would I start exercising. And I would traditionally spend a lot of time with that person talking through exercise goals, talking about, breaking up exercise into small manageable chunks. I think sometimes we can give out the message that you have to do lots of really high intensity, very involved exercise where you don't. Sometimes the messaging needs to be about breaking up inactivity in the first instance. And that's where, the chat with the specialist, comes in, that you can have those kind of conversations and deal with some of those issues. Because exercise should not be a burden. We prescribe exercise and we advocate for exercise to be part of the care pathway to reduce burden and to support people as they go through treatment and to make life a little bit easier and empower people as well. It gives them, something that they can proactively do. So it's about those good conversations and starting within your own limits.
Absolutely. And as part of that comment, they just happened to mention that at times they felt invisible, and it's great to see people like you that are, really focused on this area. And that that there are supports available, but I suppose also based on your research that hopefully there will be more supports available.
Hopefully, I mean, I think today is about talking about exercise, but I suppose we need a lot more. We need a lot more supports. We need a lot more better planning around what kind of sports we're going to develop. But we need patients to recognize as well that you can ask for these things. You know what I mean? It's the patient voice, and it's you highlighting that these things matter. Your quality of life matters during your treatment, and it's something that you should be talking about. From the time of diagnosis, how it's set out there as a right in terms of. I might just show the next slide, which I wasn't going to show, but I might just that European code talks about what you have a right to. You have a right to receive and discuss with your care team a clear, managed, objective plan for survivorship and rehabilitation. And these are examples of some of the questions that you should be asking. Will my services help me face the challenges that I experience? Will I be given a survivorship care plan? And how do I access supportive and rehab services? And patients should feel that they they have the right to ask for these things and to, you know, to drive on what we have. And I think, you know, it comes from all angles. Yeah.
Absolutely. I know from our point of view, it's great to see that's the point, you know, to really empower patients, and hopefully, you know, there are professionals out there to help them, and hopefully we can just only increase the access to service and improve the services as well that will be available. I suppose the point of your talk in general, though, I suppose it has been very positive, that really this is for your quality of life, and that, you know, it's what you're able to do, but it's to help you, and it's something that they have the capacity to change, I suppose, which is really, really positive takeaway, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, it should empower people and their journey.
Yeah, and given the amount of messages coming in there, I think it's very clear that it affects so many people. And there's a huge resource, and it's great to have the recording here to look back on as well.
Absolutely.
Emer, thanks so much for taking the time today and for answering all the questions. And thank you everyone for tuning in and for all your questions as well. It's great to have so much communication, even if we're at home.
Exactly. Thanks very much for asking me. Thank you. And thank you for
of course. Thanks very much, and thanks everyone for the support for Daffodil Day then on Friday as well. Thanks.